that it is working. Okay. It thinks we're working.
Yes.
I think we're working.
It's working.
We're going to go. We're going to go. We got to have faith. Got to have faith. Always a little bit of a time delay on the live broadcast. It's live-ish. It's semi-live. All right. So good evening to everyone. We have done 2 heavy weeks of history, and I thought we would go into something a little more practical in the immediate hands-on kind of way, and that is to talk about the wearing of a tallit and the wearing of tefillin. Now, some of you may have seen these, I certainly hope. Some of you may have even actually done them at some point in your life. We're going to talk about where the mitzvot come from, where the commandments come from, why we do them, and we're going to go over a little bit of how we do them. Now, we're not going to have time for everybody to put on a tallit or everyone to put on a tefillin. What I will recommend is in February 2nd, I think, Super Bowl Sunday, we always have what we call the Worldwide Wrap. This is a program put on by the Federation of Jewish Men's Club, which is the men's club for the conservative movement. And all around the world, they make a special push on this day to get people to come in and put on tefillin, and everyone who comes gets a chance to put them on, see how it works, what it is to wear tefillin. And of course, you can also practice wearing a tallit, but putting on a tallit is not quite so complicated. We'll talk about that. So if you have a chance and you want to learn really hands-on sooner rather than later, then in February, Super Bowl Sunday, I think it's February 2nd, 9 o'clock, we'll be doing the Worldwide Wrap, and everyone is welcome to come. But we're going to go over why we do this tonight. Good? Good. Okay. So the reason why we do it is because God told us to. That is to say, no one would have just imagined or made up the idea of wearing tallit and tefillin just on their own. But we have one paragraph in particular that gives us the mitzvah of tefillin, as well as talking about mezuzah, which we'll cover in a later session. And then we have a follow-up that talks about the commandment of tallit. So this may sound familiar. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, or the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Sound familiar, right? This is what we would call the Shema. And there we go. And the Ve'ahavta. This paragraph is recited twice a day, in the evening and in the morning, and is also quoted from numerous other times. But it is a mitzvah to recite this paragraph. And in the paragraph, you'll see just a little ways down here, it says, bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. What does that mean? What does it mean to bind them, to bind these words that I command you as a sign upon your hand? You might be forgiven for thinking this is meant poetically, that binding them on your hand just means that you should always be acting with them in mind. And you might think that maybe the symbol on your forehead between your eyes is just meant as poetry for thinking about them all the time. But as you'll notice, it is sandwiched between real. So making it just poetry doesn't really work. You'll notice the verse right in front of it says that we should recite them when we are at home and when we're away. Is that poetry? Are we just supposed to think about saying the words? No, we are supposed to actually say the words, the same way when it says to teach them to your children. That's not poetry. That's a job requirement of being a parent, is teaching to your children. And similarly at the end where it says to inscribe them on the doorposts of your home, that's not just poetry. Something up there, what we call a mezuzah. So as well, the tefillin need to be on our arm and on our head. Got the basic idea there? We're going to go into the details of what that looks like and all of the other things, but the basic mitzvah comes from this section of Deuteronomy. And it gets repeated further on in the V'haya im shamoa, in the next paragraph that we read in the Ve'ahavta cycle, where therefore, you should not say, impress them upon your heart, bind them as a sign in your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. It is repeated. So this is a mitzvah that gets double repetition. And that should be driving home how important it is. Also, we get to Vayomer, the third paragraph that we read when we read the Ve'ahavta cycle. And this paragraph are clothing. And it says specifically, speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. These fringes we call tzitzit, and they are what hang from the corner of our tallit. The actual mitzvah is the thing that's hanging down, right? The tallit, the cloth garment, this is the vehicle.
And the other fringes are just decoration.
You mean the little tassel-y type fringes?
Right.
Yes, those are just decoration. It could be a completely smooth edge, a kosher tallit. We're going to come back to show and tell in a little bit, but I just want to make sure we understand what we're talking about, that when we say these fringes, these tzitzit, we're talking about the long tassels on the corners of our garments. They shall be your fringe, and let them attach a cord of blue, a patil techelet, a string of blue to the fringe at each corner. So you have the fringes, and there is supposed to be blue somehow connected to them. We'll come back to that blue in just a minute. And you'll look at them and you'll recall the Lord and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes and your lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. So the tzitzit, these fringes, are there as a visual reminder that when we see them, we will remember all of the commandments and then we will do the commandments. So it's not like those post-it notes you put up that remind you to do something, but then you still don't do it. These are supposed to be reminders that lead to action. Again? Okay, so it's all pretty clear that God is actually telling us to do things here. Yes, we all sort of agree on that? Okay, so you'll notice again, this commandment as well is repeated in Deuteronomy, where it says to make the tassels, the fringes on the four corners that you cover yourself with. Now, that brings up a very important question, which is, how many of you wear four-cornered clothing? Right, none of us in the modern world wear four-cornered garments. It's just not the style of clothing that we wear. For most of human history, it was. That is to say, for most of history, the easiest type of clothes to make was a sheet with a hole in the top, and this you just put over your shoulders, and you had two corners in front and two corners in back, and you would sew up the edges a little bit, or you'd wrap it with a belt, and boom, you're clothed. We're lucky because we now are able to have wonderful fitting and warm and fashionable and colorful and all sorts of new clothing styles. But it does mean that we have to go out of our way to get a garment that needs tzitzit. And we're going to come back to what that means again in a bit. I always try to leave a little bit. But I want to come back to this question of blue, because this is often a very important and interesting topic that people have not learned too much about. So the blue, the color is called techelet. That's the Hebrew word that's used for this blue. And as it says in Rambam, this mitzvah, meaning of the fringes of tzitzit, commandments. One, to make the tzitzit, to make the fringe, to wind a strand of techelet around it, to wind the blue around it. Now, for most of our history, for the last 2,000 years, as the Midrash tells us, that we only have white because techelet has been hidden. What does that mean? Well, it means that the method of making the blue was lost to the common people. The blue. Anyone know? Right, this is the blue. It's from an animal. I got a hint up here. Right, it's from what's known as the murex snail. This is a type of sea snail. And that we kind of knew, because this was a common way of making purple throughout the Mediterranean. And all the descriptions in the Talmud describe a sea snail that you open up and you use its ink sac and you can make the color. But for about 2,000 years, every time someone tried to make blue, they got purple, because that is the most natural color that comes out of these snails. And so it meant that for most of our history, in most communities, people could not have the blue in their tzitzit. Now, they could still do the mitzvah of having the strands, of having the fringes, but they couldn't do the mitzvah of having the blue. Okay, so what happened? What changed? Well, what changed was in the late 1800s and then in the 1900s is they did more research to figure out how this dye could turn into blue. And what they discovered is that if you take the chemical, the dye from these snails, and you mix it with the wool or fabric indoors, you get purple. But if at just the right time during the process you do it outside, under sunlight, under ultraviolet light, so it responds to the ultraviolet radiation, which is not that surprising. It means that you have to be under the heavens to get the color of the heavens. It actually is, it's really amazing. When I was in Israel as a rabbinic student, we got to visit the factory building where they make the dye that I have here. And they showed us the process. And they put a little bit, into a container inside the building, and boom, it's purple wool. And then they go outside, they mix it up, and boom, it turns into that blue. Really quite amazing the way it works. So if you would like, you can go to Tallit.com if you'd like more information, or we can talk at another time about how this works. But this is something that has been rediscovered, but it's still quite controversial because many people say, well, it's not a question of, but our ancestors, our recent ancestors haven't done it, so should we start doing it again? And so there's an ongoing debate. As you can guess, because you've seen me wearing it, my answer is that, yes, this is suitable, this is appropriate. You don't have to, but if you would like to, we can talk about how to do it, because as we talk about the tying later on, there is a different style of knots when you use the blue than when you only use white. Because when you use the blue, you have to set aside the rings in a different way than when you just use the white strings. So I'm going to show you how the white strings get done a little bit later, but the blue get done differently. And even there's difference between different rabbis of what is the correct way to do the blue knots. And as Rabbi Meir says in Sifrei, this is the earliest form of halachic midrash, whoever observes the mitzvah of tzitzit is considered as if he greeted the divine presence. For Tallit, this blue resembles the sea, and the sea resembles the sky, and the sky resembles God's holy throne. So this is meant to be a very powerful visual channel that when you look at it, it's supposed to lead you from one thought to the next until you are standing at the throne of God. And that's why this color is special and why this color was used.
Why do you want to remember the sea?
You want to remember the sea because the sea is the color of God's throne. So it's like playing a word association game, right? This resembles that. And by taking a color that was, whoops, did someone shut the door? So I thought the door was open last I looked. But, well, usually I leave it open during the class because I know that people with traffic can sometimes come very late. But we don't want to leave anybody out in the dark. By the way, if anyone ever comes late and the door is shut, you can ring the bell, but I may not hear you. It's okay to knock on the window. I answer the window too. This blue is a very powerful mental reminder and spiritual channel to try to perceive a depth in the mitzvah. Because again, the tzitzit by themselves are a reminder, but that color reminder, well, color is often a more powerful memory pull than black and white. That's why most of us like color TVs, and we like color movies, and we like color photos. Color has a power over our mind and spirit that black and white doesn't always. Okay. So now let's talk about, do I have to? Because I've been telling you that this was a commandment to attach the fringes to your garments. Well, as Rambam puts it very clearly, one is only obligated to put tzitzit on a garment that he is wearing. It's a positive commandment. So if you're wearing a four-cornered garment, tzitzit on it. But as long as he is not wearing the garment, he does not have to put tzitzit on it. So let's imagine you were a merchant and you were selling clothes to people. If you're not wearing it, those clothes don't need tzitzit. Right? You're allowed to sell clothes without tzitzit because that was the normal way to have clothes back then. You sell somebody a cloak, it doesn't have the fringes on it. The Jewish person buys it, fringes on it. They take it home, doesn't need to have the fringes on it. They put it on, now it needs to have the fringes on it. Make sense? Now, this may seem kind of like, well, why put it off so much? Well, Tallit, especially the blue, was very, very expensive for most of our history. That's one of the reasons why the secret of how to make it was lost, was because it was a protected industry to try to price up. And unfortunately, because the price was so high, there were also many counterfeit blues. And the counterfeit blues are not kosher. They're not appropriate. So the idea here is to remind us that the commandment is only to put tzitzit on the garment you're going to wear. But as Rambam points out, even though one is not obligated to buy himself a garment that requires tzitzit, let's make sure we understand that, right? It means that you could be a good Jew and live your whole life never owning one of these, right? Because as long as you don't own it, and as long as you're not wearing it, it doesn't need these. If you choose to buy it and choose to wear it, now you have to put these on. So it's an obligation that comes from the object. It's not an obligation that's attached to the person. Tefillin is different. Tefillin is a requirement of the person. This is a requirement of the clothing. Follow the difference there, right? But as Rambam points out, a pious person, somebody who is very deep and connected to Judaism, would of course not want to exempt himself by refraining from wearing a garment that requires tzitzit, especially while praying. So what do? We go out and we buy a piece of clothing that nobody wears anymore except us, right? No one wears four-cornered garments anymore, but we deliberately buy it and we deliberately choose to wear it, especially at the time of prayer. Have to, so that we can have to put these on it. Right? It's one of those great bits of Jewish logic, is fashion changed, and now the opportunity to wear these went away. So what do? We go ahead and we make one anyway. So that way we now have to do it. We force ourselves to have an obligation that our regular clothing would have taken away from us, because otherwise we would miss the chance to be able to do this mitzvah. And although we shouldn't force ourselves to have to do every mitzvah that's possible, a mitzvah like this that is not very hard, and a mitzvah like this that has such a deep spiritual meaning, we should definitely try to put ourselves in a place to do them. Yes?
I just had a question. Is the animal only found in that area?
In the Mediterranean, yes.
Okay.
It's
Only in the Mediterranean.
all across the Mediterranean, yes.
Okay.
From what I understand, the species has other types around the world, but it's the Mediterranean one that is most important. And in many other Mediterranean countries, it was actually eaten. They would harvest those snails as food. Not kosher, but they were used for food.
That's the only one there that produces that ink?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. And like I said, people knew that it was probably that snail because they had found from 2,000 years ago the factory sites. That is to say, they found the places where all of these snail bodies up, and they had giant jugs that they had used for the dye, but they didn't know how to take it and turn it into blue. It's amazing how knowledge can be lost if it isn't shared. And that's what happened, because this was a protected industry where only a few people knew the secret. When they lost it, we lost it.
That keeping the secret, was that kind of part of a corruption thing, or?
I wouldn't call it a corruption thing. Think of it more of a monopoly. The purple in particular under the Romans was a state monopoly, meaning that under the Romans, only the emperor was allowed to wear purple. No one else was allowed to wear that color because, he was the emperor. So that forced it to be in a particular category of luxury goods. And that helped also push the price up to then for even the blue. But unfortunately, when only a few people know the secret, that makes it much more vulnerable to losing the secret. Yes?
2 quick questions. Can somebody that has not made conversion yet wear a tallit? Question number one. Question number two. I was told that it can only be worn during the day because of the commandment, okay, that you need to see
Right.
it, but now because of electricity, this is different things.
So
Those are two questions.
let's do the second question first, because it's the easier one, right? So the second question is, when do we wear a tallit? And you're right. The answer is that according to halacha, we wear a tallit during the daytime. And that also goes back to when we had the blue, is if you couldn't see the blue, then it wasn't doing its job. And you only can see blue when there's enough light to tell the difference between colors. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but at night, when it's actually dark, and it's hard to get things really dark in a city nowadays, but if you get into real dark, right, our night vision is black and white. We need light in order to see colors. And so we needed to be dawn before we would wear a tallit. So yes, the mitzvah of wearing a tallit begins at dawn and ends when the sun goes down. If you're already wearing it, you are allowed to continue to wear it. And the one place where that happens most noticeably is on Yom Kippur evening, what we call Kol Nidreh. Right? People put on their tallit in the afternoon, and they keep wearing it even though the evening has now come. And that's why you'll see people wearing a tallit in the evening of Yom Kippur. It's because they put it on before it was evening. Make sense? Okay. Who is allowed to wear a tallit? So this is a really good question, and one that was very easy for me to answer 2, 3, 4 years ago. So 2, 3, 4 years ago, as I was taught and as most rabbis had practiced, the wearing of a tallit was the last thing you did when you were practicing for conversion. Right? The wearing of a tallit, as we saw in the earlier paragraphs, is a sign of being bound by the commandments, almost literally like being tied to the commandments. And to wear a tallit was a symbol of I am bound to the commandments. It's done. I'm tied in. And that was the usual rule. So you would work with a conversion student, you teach them how to wear a tallit, they buy a tallit, and then when they came out of the mikveh, then they would start wearing the tallit. Last couple years, it's been a little unusual for rabbis around the country because there are many people who are now getting a taste of Judaism, of the official Jewish communities. And they are beginning to observe the commandments. And one of the easiest commandments to observe is wearing a tallit. Or not quite as easy, but still not that hard, is wearing tefillin, which also was usually reserved for the end of conversion. Now, reserved was because it was a very powerful symbol. But it's not that it is forbidden for someone to wear it if they're not finished with conversion. However, if someone has already begun the practice, like for example, many people here, of wearing a tallit or wearing a tefillin, I'm not going to tell you to stop and then tell you to start again after the mikveh. I want you to keep wearing them for the rest of your life. And I don't want you to break the habit. It's supposed to be something you keep doing. If you haven't yet begun wearing a tallit or tefillin, then wait until after the conversion and let that be a special transition moment of being able to wear them now in that new phase of life. So does that make sense to people? Right. Now, that can also provide a little confusion. So for example, it used to be very, very simple in the synagogue. If somebody was looking across the congregation, if you're wearing a tallit, we know you're Jewish. If you're not wearing a tallit, we know you're not Jewish. Very, very simple. Now, it's a little more complicated. So if somebody were to offer you an honor, even though you're wearing a tallit, you would say, I'm still studying for conversion. So you'd, except for the English readings, you'd have to turn down the honor. So it makes life a little more complicated, but complicated's okay. Judaism is a complicated religion.
I had an experience with Ashkenazis asking for the single guys not to wear a tallit.
Yes.
And so far, they allow everybody, and they want to make it
okay. So the Ashkenazi, many Ashkenazic, not all of them, but many Ashkenazic communities have or had a custom where unmarried men did not wear a tallit. And when they got married, but they were still wearing a tallit. They were wearing what's called a talit katan, a small talit, which is, you'll often see people wearing under their clothes and just the little fringes coming out. We'll talk about them later. There's a slide for that. And that was a secret way to know who was single and who wasn't, so you could make matches. Nowadays, we have J-Date, which is a Jewish dating system, right? So it's not such a big issue in the conservative world, and we recommend and encourage that people wear a talit gadol, the big size talit, from their bar mitzvah on. The Ashkenazim, they did still wear tzitzit, they just wore it in a different style. But that is a cultural difference. It's not a legal difference. And you'll also find in most Ashkenazi communities, for example, a divorced man or a widower, they would still wear the big talit. They wouldn't go back to only the talit katan. So there are always a few exceptions in different cultures and different systems. Any other questions on that? Okay. So why do we tie? That is to say, the mitzvah said to attach the fringes to the corners. And in fact, attaching the fringes is all you technically need to do, the bare minimum. Remember, we've talked before about this, that there's usually a really small minimum amount needed to do a commandment. If you tie the fringes on, technically, you're done. But as usual in Judaism, we like to embellish, we like to add, because we add meaning and we add extra symbols in doing that. So, as Shulchan Aruch tries to point out, there are 5 knots. This is in the all-white system. There are 5 knots in accordance with the 5 books of the Torah, and there are 4 corners, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, so that in every direction he faces, he will also remember, right? The 4 corners, the Arba Kanfot is the symbol of the 4 corners of the world. So 4 corners, north, south, east, west, 4 corners on the talit. Every direction, I am thinking of God. I can't turn away from God because there are fringes here, there are fringes there, fringes there. I can't get away from God. I can't escape the commandments. I am always pursuing God no matter which direction I turn. It is proper to wear the tzitzit on the garments, and at the very least, it is proper to wear tzitzit at the time of prayer. So you'll notice here, we've now had both in Rambam and in Joseph Caro and Shulchan Aruch, the idea that it's not technically required to wear a talit all the time. But at least when we're praying, we should be wearing a talit. And that's why you'll notice that when people come into the sanctuary, they put on the talit, and when they finish the service, they take off the talit. Because at least for that moment, we're going to wear the garment that needs the tzitzit, that needs the fringes. If someone wants to wear a talit katan, a small talit, the whole day, or if someone wants to wear a big talit while they are studying at home or something, that's also okay, but it's not required. And we'll talk about, again, that small talit in just a minute. But first, I want to talk the knots. So this is the white on white system. So there's no blue involved in that pattern over there, but you'll see, let's see if I can point a little bit here and dodge the cables. So this is the corner of the talit. Obviously, the real talit's bigger than that. And you make a double knot. That means you tie the strands together. There are 4 strands on this side, 4 strands on that side, and there's 1 string that's longer than all the others. That's your wrapper string. You tie a double knot, then you do 7 wraps with your wrapper string, another double knot, 8 wraps, another double knot, 11 wraps, another double knot, 13 wraps, another double knot, and then they all hang down. Everyone got that pattern? Right? So it's 7, 8, 11, 13. So perfect. It's very clear, right? Well, so there's symbolism behind these numbers. And by the way, for those of you who have ever worn a talit, if you've never had a chance to tie the tzitzit, it is a really powerful experience to tie your own tzitzit rather than just buying them from the store already attached. And if you ever undo your tzitzit and want to retie them for yourself, that's great. Usually they're going to be very springy, wavy, because they've been coiled for so long. All you need to do is you take your teapot, your kettle, clean out, and you just pass the strings in front of the steam, and they'll smooth out instantly. All right, I don't know much about laundry, but I know that. All right, so what do these symbols mean? 7, 8, 11, and 13. Well, 7 days of the week, is the symbol of wholeness and perfection in the physical world, in this world. 8 is this world plus 1. It's this world and beyond, right? It is seeing another level to this world. So when you see 7 and then 8, you are thinking of this world, and then you are thinking of everything beyond this physical world. Together, 7 plus 8, they equal 15. Well, 15 is the first 2 letters of God's name, Yud He, right? And Yud He is also one of the short names for God, Yah, as in hallelujah, right? Give praise to Yah. It's one of the shorter names of God. So 15, 7, and 8, this world and beyond this world is a reflection of God. Following that? All right. 11 is the value of the last 2 letters of God's name, right? The Vav and the He, 6 and 5. So we have God's name put together with the first 3 wrapping systems, if you look at it that way. And then 13, lest you think there's 3, is the value of the Hebrew word echad, right? So, right, because you have 1, and you have 8, and you have 4, 13. Yay, math. That math I can still do. So together, this is all a very elaborate way of saying that God is one in this world and beyond this world, and it all ties together, meaning all the commandments tie together, because the knots together make us think of all 613. So here's another bit of math. The Hebrew word tzitzit, the word for the fringes, the letters add up to be 600. You then say there are 8 threads, and there are 5 sets of knots. 600 plus 8 plus 5, 613, 613 commandments in the Torah. Yay, math. Right, this system of using the letters in words to mean things is what we call gematria. And it can be a very insightful way of seeing connections between different parts of Judaism. How's the math? I get the math okay? I good. Right. Okay, so, but like I said, that's for the white on white knots. If you are using Tallit, then there are different varieties of wrapping. This, for example, is the Maimonides, Rambam's version of wrapping, which uses these separated loops or rings of the blue. Okay, so how do we actually put on a tallit? How do we do what we've been talking about? So, get this as it would be coming from the bag, now that I've got it all vermished. Yes, a little bit of Yiddish goes a long way. Yeah, crumpled and rumpled. I mean, what vermished is, there's no other good word. All right, so usually my tallit comes out of the bag like this. And the first thing you do is you check to make sure your tzitzit are still there. Not such a worry nowadays. In the old days, when your fabric maybe not so good, or maybe it was wearing out, sometimes they might have fallen up. You had to make sure that your tzitzit are there, make sure the knot is still in place. Then we have to get the tallit ready. Now, the easiest way to do this is to hold it so that the neck piece, pardon the sweat stains, the neck piece, the atara, is facing towards you. We'll have the blessing written right on it. Some don't. There's no requirement. It's just a convenience or style. And when you say the blessing, you'll say it as it's written up here, which you'll notice the last 2 words for this mitzvah blessing are lehit atef batzitzit, which literally means to wrap ourselves in the fringes. And that means that after I say the blessing, I have to do that. So you'll say the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, anu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, lehit atef batzitzit. And the custom is usually to, and then it goes, oh, hard to do this in slow motion and with all the cables. Up and over and around, so that you are literally wrapped in the fringes. And then after a few moments, You go up and you settle it on your shoulders. Now, this kind of tallit, you customarily flip up and fold so that it hangs down like that and looks like that in the back. But there are other styles of tallit. Some are more like a neck version. Some come down around the shoulders. There are different types of clothing. But as long as it has 4 corners, it's a tallit. We'll talk about size in just a minute when we get to the tallit katan. Questions?
The only question I have is I've noticed that then when they go to the restroom, they take it off.
So this is one of those odd technicalities. Remember how I said that the blessing is written on the neck piece, which contains God's name, which can't go to the bathroom.
So if they're wearing the undershirt kind of tzitzit,
Exactly
they have to
right.
take it off.
Exactly. So if you're wearing the undershirt type, the tallit katan, which does not have the blessing written on it, then of course you wear it into the bathroom. You're not going to strip to your waist every time you want to go to the bathroom.
Outside.
Yeah, exactly. Before you walk in, it doesn't work out so well. Yeah, and I remember in the old days where you were a farmer and it would not have been pretty at all. So the tallit we leave outside, but even talitot, that's the plural, even talitot that don't have the blessing, it is still our strong custom to take it off the shoulders and hang it up before going into the bathroom.
Because someone might see you go in with it and not realize when you have to take it off and when not.
Which is
So
what we
you don't have to
call,
confuse people.
that's what we call marit ain, exactly. When you give a false impression that could lead someone else to make a transgression. So since many talits do have the blessing on it, they may think mine did and see me go in, and now they think it's okay, and then they do, and they're now they've done something wrong. So it is generally a good custom to not wear it into the bathroom.
So when you go to the bathroom, you came back, you have to do the blessing again?
You don't have to do the blessing again. As long as you are still planning to put it back on, then it's still covered by that blessing, right? If you take it off because you think you're done, and then half an hour later you go, you know what, I wanted to do something else, then you would say the blessing again, exactly. If you were completely, your mind was finishing the wearing. Okay. Tallit katan. I kept putting this off, but it's finally time to talk about it. So the tallit katan is the small tallit, like what clothing used to look like. Just a long piece of cloth with a hole in the middle, and you put it over your head, and there are 2 corners in front and 2 corners in back. Slightly different blessing that we say for a tallit katan. So as you see at the very end, we say v'tzivanu al mitzvat tzitzit, which literally means commanding us. Commanding us about the fringes is that's the only blessing you say for a tallit katan. So because you're not fully wrapping yourself in this garment, but you are wearing a garment that needs tzitzit. Maybe. So this is a bit of an issue in the modern world. It used to be, and if you look at pictures of Jews from the 1800s, that the small tallit they wore was still pretty big. It was still a pretty good size piece of cloth. Nowadays, you'll find like skinny tallit katans, that are like hugging your body and very, very, small, because it's more comfortable to wear a smaller piece of cloth than a heavy piece of cloth, especially in Florida in the summer. But this raises an issue, which is technically for a garment to need tzitzit, it has to have 4 corners or more than 4 corners. So if you had a 8-cornered garment, you would still need tzitzit. You put the tzitzit on the farthest corners from each other. You spread it out as much as possible. But B is the one that's most important. It has to be big enough to cover the head and the majority of the body of a child who is able to walk on his own in the marketplace without having someone else accompany him and watch him. Usually this is considered to be about 8 or 9 years old. Nowadays, maybe we don't send our kids down to the marketplace at 8 or 9, but they used to. And so that was the age that was sort of standard. So if you think about an 8 or 9-year-old, you have to imagine, is this garment big enough that I could put it on them and it would come down covering most of their body as a piece of garment? If it's big enough, then yes, it needs tzitzit. And if it needs tzitzit, then yes, you can say the blessing. If it doesn't need tzitzit, you can't say the blessing. So for example, if you had a scarf, nobody would ever send their kid to the the market wearing a scarf or just a scarf, right? You would want something a little bigger. If you put tzitzit on a scarf, well, you're allowed, but you're not allowed to say the blessing because you're not doing the commandment. You're just wearing a garment, wearing clothing. And this is a point that comes up often in Jewish law, which is saying a blessing for something that doesn't need the blessing is worse than not saying the blessing. It's what we call a bracha levatala, a wasted blessing, a null blessing, an empty blessing. And an empty blessing is a problem because you're mentioning God's name. Right? We're not allowed to use God's name for something that wasn't being commanded. And we can't make a claim that God commanded me to wear this when it's too small to be worn. So depending upon the size of the small talit, the talit katan, it may not need the blessing. You can still wear it without the blessing and still have the reminder of the tzitzit, but it's a little bit of a gray area for the size of some of these talitot. But that's perhaps more complicated than we need. All right, now we got to start moving. Otherwise, we're never going to finish. Okay. So tefillin. Tefillin are the little leather boxes that you see people wearing on their head and wearing on their arm. Now, when I say you see them, if you've never been to a weekday service, you may not have ever seen them because we don't wear them on Shabbat. Why? Because the tefillin are considered to be an ot, a sign of the relationship between us and God. Guess what else is called an ot, a sign of the relationship between us and God? Shabbat, right? So because on Shabbat we are wrapped in Shabbat, we are wrapped in the time of Shabbat, we are wrapped in the symbol of our connection, we don't wrap the tefillin as well. We don't add another sign. Because if you add another sign, it kind of makes it seem like the first sign wasn't enough, right? It's like when your parents remind you to do something and then they tell you again and you get annoyed. It's like, you already told me once, right? It makes it sound like the first one wasn't enough. So Shabbat is enough of a sign. Adding tefillin would be inappropriate. But during the week, right, Sunday all the way through Friday, we have the obligation to wear tefillin. As it says in Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, place me as a seal. Let me read it from over here. It's easier than sideways. Rabbi Berechia said, this refers to the recitation of the Shema, as it says, and these matters shall be upon your heart. As a seal upon your arm, this refers to tefillin. And this is what it means when it says, and you shall bind them on your arm. So this seal was the idea was of the image was of a permanent connection between ourselves and God. And that's what the tefillin is meant to represent. So when do we do it? Well, it is a mitzvah to have the tefillin on all day. But if you look around, you'll see that nobody wears tefillin all day. Why not? Because the body needs to be clean, which the tefillin does not allow one to do. And one is not allowed to distract his mind from them. And people are not able to be careful. So we do not put them on all day. So what this means is that during the day, you have to go to the bathroom. You've got to change the baby. You have to fix the toilet. You have to do your job. All of those things means that your mind and your body are away from those tefillin and what the tefillin represent. And that means when you're not in that focused mode, the tefillin have to go back into storage. You're only allowed to wear them when you can be 100% focused and sure 100% that you're not walking into the bathroom, if you will. Understand that distinction? Okay. Therefore, nevertheless, everyone needs to be careful with them. So we put them on during the reciting the Shema and prayer. The prayer here means the Amidah. Why? Because we need to be focused and clean and ready for the Shema and the Amidah. So since we know we're going to have the right focus, have the right attention for those prayers, then we can wear the tefillin during that time. So that's why you'll see that during the services, especially the morning service, is when people will wear tefillin, because they know they are focused at that moment. Good? Good. Okay, so what's actually inside the tefillin? Did you know there was something inside? if you didn't, there's something inside. So this is an arm tefillin, and you'll see it has one long scroll. I'll pass this around. And then this is taken from the head tefillin. And as you can see, there are 4 little chambers with 4 little scrolls inside. So go ahead and take a look. Don't pull them out because I'll never get them back in. But you can take a look. So inside, it's the same in both. In the head one, they're on 4 separate pieces of parchment. And in the arm one, it is on one long piece of parchment. But you have these 4 passages. One from Exodus, talking about the duty of the Jewish people to remember the redemption. Another one from Exodus talking about teaching our children about that. Another one from Deuteronomy, which is the section of the Shema that we looked at earlier. And the other is from Deuteronomy as well that we saw earlier, the V'haya im Shamoa section, where it talks about the reward and connection from following the commandments. So if you were to take the scrolls out, you would find those 4 sections from the Torah written in one long roll on the arm and in 4 little rolls for the head. How are we doing? Making our way around? Okay. Yes.
Rabbi, what's the difference to the Tefillin and Tefillin that Rabbi Natan?
That's advanced class number 102, right? Right. So the difference between Rabbeinu Tam tefillin and other tefillin is another knotty subject. We don't need to go into that today. But there's a difference of opinion of exactly the best way to make them and how they have to be designed. And there are some people who they're not sure which is perfect, and so they wear both. They put one on and then they take it off and they put the other on. Thank you. But we are going to talk about another doubt in just a minute. But that's a little bit farther than I want to get today. I don't want to add too much confusion. Okay. What is going to be confusing for many people, however, is the question of women and tefillin.
I was just going to ask you.
Were you looking at my notes?
Not at all.
Oh,
I read the mind.
did I just pull? I pulled the cable out again. I think that was the video cable this time. Hold on a second. Oh dear. Just when it was getting exciting. Is it still recording? Well, it looks like it is. All right, let's go ahead and pretend like it's still working. Well, if it's not working, I can't fix it today. So we'll assume it's still working. And maybe I'll figure out another place to stay. What's that? Most of us are here, exactly. Okay, so do women wear tefillin? Well, traditionally, we have a question of precedent for the last 2,000 years. For most of the last 2,000 years plus, women were not obligated to wear tefillin. That is to say, tefillin was an example, which we talked about before, of the general rule, time-limited commandment. That this was a commandment that was supposed to be done at a certain time, and it was a commandment that was a you should do it, not a you shouldn't do it. And that meant that women, like for other commandments, did not have an obligation to do it. Now, we've talked before about how in the modern world, with the changing structure of the society, women have more time and more independence. But that aside, if a woman wanted to wear tefillin over the last 2,000 years, not just in the 20th century, but over the last 2,000 years, wear tefillin. The short answer is, for most halakhic authorities, the answer was yes. If a woman wanted to wear tefillin, she was allowed to wear tefillin. She wasn't forced to, she wasn't required to, but she was permitted to. All the way back in the Talmud, you can see that they taught that Michal bat Kushi wore tefillin, and the sages did not protest. So they had an example of a woman who wore tefillin, and nobody complained that she was wearing tefillin. Now, during the Middle Ages, there came to be a feeling that women shouldn't be allowed to wear tefillin because the women weren't able to take the commandment, take the mitzvah seriously enough. They weren't able to properly fulfill that commandment. and therefore they shouldn't be allowed to do it. And in our modern world, there have been some rabbis who say that women who want to wear tefillin are rebels. They are trying to be controversial. And because they are doing it for that reason, it's not the right reason, so therefore we shouldn't let them wear tefillin. Now, you may guess, I don't agree with those opinions, right? I think that women and men both are capable of doing the mitzvah correctly, and that they should be taught how to do the mitzvah correctly, which is why when we do our worldwide wrap in the chapel, Super Bowl Sunday, 9 o'clock, be there. It is for men and women to see and to learn how to wear tefillin. As Rabbi Golinkin, one of the great rabbis in Jerusalem of the conservative movement, wrote, there is ample halachic justification for allowing women to wear tefillin. The overwhelming halachic evidence teaches us that women may wear tefillin, like Michal bat Shaul, that's the Michal up here, and some righteous women in France, Italy, Eastern Europe, and Israel, and we do not protest. And in fact, this happened multiple times. There are records of women who did wear tefillin throughout history. So if a woman wants to wear tefillin, it is absolutely permitted by our history of authority. In my own opinion, in the modern world where women now have an equal standing of independence within a society with men, they are not servants to their husbands, wear tefillin the same way that men should wear tefillin. But that's a bigger conversation about the changing roles in the modern world. But I just want to make sure that we've got it clear here that just because you're a woman doesn't mean you can't. For most of our history has agreed you can, but you must. Good? So don't let anyone tell you you're not allowed to. We can argue about whether you have to, but no one can tell you you're not allowed to. Okay, the blessings. There is a different blessing for putting the tefillin on the head and putting the tefillin on the arm. I put those back. I got them right on the page, but I did them backwards when I'm just describing it. Because we put on the arm tefillin first. And the arm tefillin finishes with lahaniach tefillin, which means to wear tefillin. Whereas the head, we finish with al mitzvat tefillin, which you may notice is very similar to the Tallit Katan blessing. There's an argument about whether one blessing is enough for both tefillin, or whether you need a different blessing for each of them. Remember I mentioned with the Rabbeinu Tam of the doubt. And so what people do with the head tefillin blessing, we say Baruch Shem Kavod. We say a line which is basically saying, if this blessing isn't really needed, then please God interpret it as just being a praise of you rather than saying this is actually a commandment. To cover our bases, to fit all the opinions and to compromise, essentially, with where we are on this. So how does it work? Oh, sorry. And then as we finish, we quote from Hosea, as we are wrapping around our hand, we quote, I will betroth you to myself forever. I will betroth you to myself in righteousness and justice and in kindness and mercy, self in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. It's one of the most beautiful lines from Hosea, this metaphor of being married to God in perfect faithfulness and of good relation. And as we are putting the wraps around our finger, it's very much sort of a symbolic of putting almost a wedding ring onto our hands, so of being married to God. Okay, so how does it work? We're just going to do this briefly, but like I said, worldwide wrap, we'll go through this in more time. If anyone wants to make an appointment with me, I can go over it with you more slowly, but this is the brief version. You can watch the rewind version online, and then you can slow it down. So first of all, you have to figure out which arm you're going to put the tefillin on. And on the arm you don't write with. Right? So if you are right-handed, your tefillin go on the left arm. If you are left-handed, your tefillin go on your right arm. If you're ambidextrous, meaning you can use both hands, whichever hand you write with most, that's the arm you don't put it on. Right? You don't go back and forth picking each day. You pick one and then you settle. All right, so you put your tefillin up through the arm without your sleeve on. It has to be against your skin. You put the tefillin up. It's almost like a bracelet. And the box comes up onto your bicep, and it should be basically in the middle of your bicep, about 2 fingers up from the bend of the elbow. Everyone got that picture there, nice and clear? The knot is against your body, right? You can see the little knot on the edge of the tefillin and pointed inwards towards your body. And the tefillin should be angled. It shouldn't be like pointing up like a Popeye bicep. It's not right on the top of your arm. It's angled inward on your arm so that when you fold your arm, it's pressing against where your heart is. And that's another way to remember that it'll always be at about heart level on your body. Okay. When it's in that position, you hold the strap and you say the first blessing, the Lahaniach Tefillin strap, and then it comes out and around. This is a difference between Sephardic and Ashkenazim again. The Ashkenazim, we pull down and around our arm towards us. The Sephardim go the opposite way outwards around. Line of tzitzit, this knot, the one up here at the very beginning, that first pull that tightens it, that's the only one that matters. The rest is decoration and symbolism, right? And it's very important symbolism, but this is the mitzvah here. This is something that became very important when I was a teenager, when I was in my synagogue and there was a young man who was getting ready for his bar mitzvah, and he did not have a hand, right? His hand was just, he was born without a hand. So obviously he's right-handed, but he was very concerned because he couldn't put tefillin on correctly, wraps on for a hand. And the rabbi explained to him, all of this will work out so that it will still be good for you, but this is the mitzvah, so that he knew that he was doing the mitzvah as good as everyone else. He may not be able to do the whole thing, but he could do this, which is the actual mitzvah equal to everyone else in the synagogue. Like I said, when it's going down the arm, we do 7 straps. Remember again, 7 being a very special number from earlier. Another thing that's very special with 7 is Isaac and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. So that we have the all of our ancestors, if you will, strengthening our arm on this side. When we get down to our hand, it comes around, and then we just fill up the rest in the middle. And that's the arm paused. And then we go to the head. For the head tefillin, very important, the front, the actual bite, the main part, should be between the hairline, or where your hairline used to be, and the peak of the head. Right? It should not be here in the center of your forehead. Right? It needs to be where your head is curving. If with your tefillin, if you could draw a line down the box, you did it wrong. Right? The line needs to be headed forward, not downward. So you don't want your tefillin here. You don't want your tefillin there. You want your tefillin here to there. Anywhere along here is fine. Image? Good. And at the back, if you feel under your head, there's a spot where your spine meets your skull, right? It's called the occipital socket or something like that. That's where the knot rests on the back. And that gives it not just a secure place, but it means that between here and here, it's like you have this ring, this crown that surrounds your head. And well, it's a very special feeling you'll experience. Then we say, when we're ready, we have it in position almost, we say the blessing, and then we move it so that it's tight. Just like in all things in Judaism, we say the blessing first, and then we do the action. So you get it close, and then you pull it firm. And then, like I said, we say the Baruch Shem Kavod line to finish off. Now, one little thing that people often forget, and then the 2 little tail straps, you pull them around the front so that they're hanging down here. They're not flapping around behind you, they're in front of you. And we do the Tallit before the Tefillin. Right, this is from a general principle in Jewish law. If you have 2 commandments that you need to do, you pick the one you do most frequently and do it first. So since we wear a Tallit every day, including Shabbat, but we only wear a tefillin 6 days a week, the Tallit gets priority. So the Tallit goes on first, then the tefillin goes on.
Does the head one always have a sheen on the box?
Yes, yes. with the four branches, which represents the 4 chambers inside. All right, then we get to our hand. Now, there are many different traditions. The Ashkenazim and Sephardim are sort of 2 traditions along this part, but once you get to the hand, there's like a whole range of different ways of wrapping the hand. Not just one Ashkenazic and one Sephardic. There are many, many different versions. This is one of the most common Ashkenazic methods for wrapping the hand. But if you've learned another way, or if you'd like to learn other ways, hareze meshubach, that's wonderful. But this is one of the standard ways. And the idea is you pull the strap down. Remember, it was sort of all waiting from while we were doing the head. And then you go from here up to that first joint on that middle finger. And you do one wrap, and you say the first line. And you say the third line. And then you do the fourth lap, and you say the fourth line. Third line. 1, 2, 3 of the 3 lines from Hosea. Remember the ones that we mentioned there, the betrothing lines. First wrap, second wrap, third wrap. Okay. And then when we're done, we have a whole lot extra, usually, after we've done that last one. So we come up across here, and then we just wrap all the extra down that middle bar of, well, what Hebrew letter is this? A shin, right? And there are ways to look at this as being a shin plus the dalid on the back of the tefillin, or plus a dalid made between these, plus a yud here, which spells Shaddai, which is one of God's name. Now, it's lucky that we're spelling it only kind of, because if we spelt it for real, we can't erase it. But and then you wouldn't be able to take off your tefillin ever. But it is a reminder of God as Shaddai, as one of God's names. And Shaddai is often translated as being Almighty when reading the English translations. Okay, if we put it all together, Tallit and Tefillin, let's wrap it up. Exactly. So Rambam, as usual, gives us a very good explanation. When he's talking about what does it mean to sanctify God's name? What does it mean to be a living example of God and godliness in the world? He says, if a sage, if someone who is learned, is exacting, right? They're very careful with themselves, and their speech is calm, and with the creatures, and his way is pleasant, and with them, and he greets them with a pleasant countenance, a good face, a smile, and is insulted by them, but does not insult them back, meaning that you don't get angry, you don't get mean, you don't be petty and nasty. If he honors other people, even those that don't treat him well, and does business in good faith, and does not enjoin and frequent hospitality of the ignorant, you don't hang around with stupid people and mean people and their gatherings, and is not constantly seen, you're not always going around showing off, but rather is involved in Torah, is wrapped in the tzitzit, the fringes, is crowned with the tefillin, and comports himself and treats himself in all of his actions beyond the letter of the law. You're going really above and beyond what is necessary. And that is, if he also does not distance himself greatly and not become strange, you're not allowed to become like so super religious that you hide in a cave, right? You still have to be with the world and be with other people. Then, in the end, all will praise him and love him and desiring his actions. Right? You will find that the people of the community love a person like this. And behold, such a one has sanctified the Lord. Right? This is a way that makes people look at somebody who's religious and they thank God for a person like this, and they respect God more when they see a person like this. Rambam points out there are other people who do some things, like they wear a tallit or they wear a tefillin, but then they behave in horrible ways. They are mean to other people. They are insulting to other people. They do things in their business that is not honest. And then, unfortunately, people think less of God. And that's why it's very important that as we wear a tallit, as we wear tefillin, that we are trying to set an example and to live up to that example, the best person that we possibly can be. That this is all meant to elevate our spirit. And I don't know whether you've ever had an experience of being in a play or of helping out with a project where you had to wear a costume or wear a uniform. Maybe you were the monitor on the bus and they gave you a sash to wear, or maybe you were helping with an event and they gave you a special name tag that you had to wear. And when you wore it, you felt a little prouder. When you wore it, you felt a little stronger. That's what Tallit and Tefillin are meant to do. They are a badge, a uniform of God. And it's not meant to make us, arrogant. Feel strong enough to do the job we're supposed to do. And to feel that connection in what we do. And to remember what we are supposed to do. So, incredibly powerful. And like I said, we'll have to have another time when we can go through individually to show you how to wear, how to use, and what they're like.
Right? If you wear like a name of the company,
yes,
and after that you're allowed to put the tefillin.
Oh yes, yes, yeah. If you're wearing like a company uniform, you're still allowed to wear tefillin, still allowed to wear a tallit. Absolutely, you can talk to your company, but as far as Judaism is concerned, no problem, no problem. Yes.
Is there a special way to take them off?
You take them off in the reverse order. The head, you undo the hand first, then you take the head off, wrap it up, and put it away. Take off the rest of the arm, wrap it up, put it away, and take off your tallit, fold it, and put it away.
When you take it off, it's a way to wrap it.
There's not an official way. Usually what you'll find is that to keep your tefillin in good shape, you'll find there are different techniques to wrap it equally, so it doesn't twist it or bend it. So you want to wrap like a certain amount on each side so that your tefillin will stay sharp and straight.
But you did not have to take it off and just put it.
Yeah, don't just shove it into the bag. Yeah, wrap it up nicely. Yes. I think I saw a hand over here first.
Since tefillin is not obligatory for girls, do they still say the prayer?
So this is a question that came up during Jewish history. And some authorities say yes, and some authorities say no. So, but even during the history, when people were saying that they didn't have to wear it, unlike the modern world and the conservative movement, even during history, they said that women should say the prayer among some authorities, but some didn't. Obviously, in my opinion, women should wear them and therefore should say the blessing. But even for those who follow the idea that women can wear them, there are many authorities from history that say that the women should still say the blessing when they do it.
Doesn't the blessing say, and God commanded us to? But if they weren't commanded, isn't that?
And that's the argument for those that are saying that they shouldn't say the blessing. But then the counter argument is there are many things that women have the option to do, like shaking the lulav, and when they do it, they say the blessing because they are speaking in the collective we, that God commanded us, meaning Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. In totality, we have the commandment, and I have the opportunity to do the commandment today, and so I get to say the blessing when I do it. So that's why there's a debate. That's why there's a debate. Any other questions on Tallit and Tefillin tonight?
Those scrolls.
Yes.
They're very tiny.
Yes, they are.
But they roll around. What's written on them?
All of those paragraphs that
All
you can
of
look
those
up.
paragraphs.
Yep. And that's why you start off learning how to write a mezuzah.
Yeah.
And when you get good to write a mezuzah, then you start writing tefillin. And when you get good at the big tefillin, then you write the small tefillin. This is why if you ever go into a tefillin shop, not a lot of them in Orlando, but if you ever go and want to buy tefillin, the bigger the tefillin, the cheaper the tefillin. Because the bigger tefillin, you don't need as good of a scribe to write because they're writing bigger letters. And the smaller the tefillin, the more expensive because you had to get a more expensive scribe to get very nice handwriting to fit it in that space. Exactly right.
Wouldn't it take them longer also?
Well, yeah, because you're very, very careful. It's not, I mean, anytime you're writing, holy words, you're not just writing it out like a shopping list. But yes, when you have to be that carefully precise and that tiny, it definitely adds to the time.
Yeah, it's the same with the Torah.
Yes.
Small Torah is more expensive
Yes.
than the big one.
A small kosher Torah is going to be more expensive than a big kosher Torah. Absolutely.
So is there a recommended place to buy your tefillin?
Thank you for the opportunity to make a commercial. Although we do usually have a pair or maybe two in our gift shop. If you're looking to get some, you can order ones that are known to be kosher and checked from the FJMC, the Federation of Jewish Men's Club, the people who help us to put on the worldwide wrap. They have a website, fjmc.org, and they not only sell tefillin that are known to be checked and kosher, but they also have very good prices on them. So tefillin will usually cost a couple $100s or more, depending upon how fancy you want to go. They're not the cheapest thing that we buy as part of our Jewish life, but they can last you a lifetime. So it's a good investment.
Should you measure your head when you order a tefillin, or?
The only thing you need to know is left-handed or right-handed, because the knots are the maker. But for the head, you can adjust that knot at home. And if you can't adjust it, you can talk to me and I can help you adjust it. Yeah. Yeah, so that the head is actually not that bad. And in fact, everyone will eventually have to adjust the head knot, because over time the leather strap gets a little bit looser and stretchy, and then you have to tighten it up again. So, or you lose a little hair and then you have to tighten it up again. So everyone has to eventually tighten their head knot. In fact, sometimes that's why, remember I mentioned how some people wear theirs like hanging off their eyebrow. That's because it fit before, but now it's stretched so much that it's sagging and they've never retightened the straps. You know, they stayed in the hot tub too long. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. We'll leave it there. All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.